Welcome back to our last session, everybody. And it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Marianne Nikolov to you. She is a professor emerita at the University of Pécs in Hungary. And prior to her recent retirement, she served as the head of Department of English Applied Linguistics, and she was the director of the Doctoral School of Linguistics for many years. Early in Marianne's career, she used to teach young learners of English from 6 to 14 years old. And she worked as a mentor in pre-service teachers of English as a foreign language for 10 years before moving on into higher education. She has taught in academic courses widely, and she has worked on age factor and early language learning, assessment of and for learning, teacher education and classroom research. She has published widely and conducted large-scale national and smaller-scale international studies, organized international projects and colloquia. And we are now very much looking forward to your talk, Marianne, on the tapestry of young learners assessment. Over to you. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. This was a very kind introduction. And thank you for staying with us, to everybody who is online. I would have given a very different talk last summer because I was very much into an overview that we published with Veronica, who was in the previous session, in language teaching. And I would like to suggest that anybody who has the feeling that this is not a whole picture, this is not detailed enough, you should simply go and read that very detailed and in many ways somewhat boring paper. Today, I would like to talk about certain things which now I think I should have known, or I would have been probably better off had I known as a beginner teacher of young learners. I used to teach children from the late 1970s, the same kids for 8 years. And that's how I actually learned a lot about children and language learning and about teacher learning, because I had to learn with them. So here is, oh, now my PowerPoint does not go down. I wish I could tell you why not. Yes, it does. So here goes my overview of what I would like to talk about today. I would like to mention certain facts about the recent popularity of early foreign language learning. I discuss some aspects of the aims of early foreign language learning, the construct and certain models. I'll mention a few large-scale and experimental assessment projects, as well as some studies on content-based and preschool programs as recent trends. I'll try to say a few words about the impact of young learners assessment, about teachers' practices and assessment literacy, and I will conclude with some concerns about the field, as well as about further research where I think it's necessary. So my first point concerns this roller coaster of enthusiasm towards teaching young learners foreign languages. Since the 1960s, there have been 3 major waves, with mostly a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, and due to discouraging results, a loss of enthusiasm followed and a low ebb of interest. As Richard Johnstone said in 2009, early English programs are the world's biggest policy development in education, and that's what has been typical since the early 2000s. This recent exponential growth is mostly due to parental beliefs in the myth that the younger the better in any condition, and that has been driving this most recent 4th wave. There are 2 recent hypotheses that I will touch upon based on research on assessment. Number 1, that preschool foreign language learning is great, and the second one concerns content-based programs that they are better than the more traditional foreign language programs. There are also some social issues. Early access to English has some implications for equity. Now, at the bottom of this screen, you can see the publication I referenced. Many of the things I discuss or only touch upon are discussed in every possible detail in that long paper published in Language Teaching. Now, based on our overview of the literature, I would like to characterize the state of the art in what we now call the fourth wave. Millions of young learners learn English, and there are hardly any studies on other foreign languages. Few programs are implemented or published about. The second main finding concerns the range of age. At this point, there are publications on assessment of children between the ages of 3 to 12 or 14, depending on how the school system is structured. There is a very obvious shift towards assessment due to accountability. Traditional foreign language programs are now complemented or taken over by content-based foreign language programs. The teachers tend to be non-native users of English as a lingua franca, and this has very serious implications clearly for language assessment. And there is a varied focus on implicit versus explicit learning and instruction, especially because in some contexts, young learners clearly know more than they are taught in school. Before I go any further, I would like to discuss the aims of early foreign language learning and how it's related to the construct that we want to assess. First of all, we have language aims, and this is obvious because the learners are young. Some of them are not even literate. Therefore, the priority concerns listening and speaking and interaction. And as they grow somewhat older, literacy aims also enter the scene. There are clearly content aims concerning knowledge and skills that young learners need to develop. And affective aims are quite numerous. Traditionally, curricula only spoke about attitudes towards the target language and maybe the speakers and the culture, but even motivation has been on the agenda, and some more recently proposed constructs like self-confidence, self-perception, willingness to communicate, anxiety, growth mindset, and many other aspects in the affective domain, which I had no idea about when I started out. I only observed motivation and children's attitudes, mostly towards the classes rather than anything else. Cognitive aims are typically included in curricula, and they are manifested in what strategies are preferred and promoted, including metacognitive strategies, and they also concern first language aims and aims promoted in other subject domains in schools. Social skills are also on the agenda, and most of the curricula also offer equal opportunities, or they claim they do. Finally, the big question is, what of these is assessed? Typically, and that's already one of the conclusions, it's only the language aims that are included in the vast majority of studies. Now let's look at the construct. First of all, we need to think about a continuum between the target language. I'm using the terms target language, second language, foreign language interchangeably just to avoid repetition all the time. So the focus of curricula and programs tends to range from the target language and the content. I will come back to this point in a second. The construct is, just like in any other assessment, language knowledge and strategic competence, that is, the ability to use the target language communicatively, and not only in social, but also in academic domains. Originally, for young learners, academic domains were not considered. This is a relatively recent development. Now, all of these are developmentally related, and we need to bear in mind that children use, first of all, the younger they are, the more they rely on memory-based implicit learning, and gradually they become more able to think in terms of rule-based explicit learning. The focus tends to be on listening and speaking, and literacy skills are also included as the children grow somewhat older. In that overview of the literature, we identified a couple of shifts in assessment of young learners' foreign language abilities. Number one, over the decades, the approach has shifted away from let's just have a little fun and everything should be easy and no assessment whatsoever, to standards-based measurement of the target language outcomes. And these have been defined in multiple works, including some things that I have published myself. As a result, the frameworks proposed by certain authors who are concerned with young learners and assessment proposed frameworks, and they tend to be aligned to the CEFR. And today we heard something about this topic. So this is like the evergreen reference point every time young learners and assessment are mentioned. And a lot has been accomplished in that domain. As I mentioned, another shift is characteristic from the social to the academic situation-based use of the target language. And two recent trends, especially in Europe, concern a shift of focus theoretically to the content and to very young learners. Studies have been focusing on assessment of and assessment for learning, in other words, on summative and formative assessments. And the final typical shift concerns from print and face-to-face communication to digital and virtual. But this is not characteristic of young learners only, but also of our area. Now, before I move on, I would like to simply summarize what we know from the literature about the conditions of successful early foreign language programs. First of all, children need opportunities to learn and use the target language both in school and after a while or parallelly outside of school. It is very important to consider home literacy practices in the first language or in the first languages of the children, and their socioeconomic status is of utmost importance, as is known from educational research as well as from linguistic research. In a very simplified version, age-appropriate curriculum has to be implemented well. Children need sufficient time to develop their proficiency in the target language in all the 4 skills. And we know from second language studies, especially on English as a second language, that it may take 3 to 7 years for children to achieve native-like proficiency, although they are immersed into their host environment educational system. Now, in foreign language context, this may take even longer, and because most of the speakers around them are not native speakers, it may be even more complicated. Now, the best predictors of successful target language development include learner internal characteristics, individual differences in aptitude, motivation maintained over the years, many years, and their first language skills. And there are certain program-related variables, which I'm not going to go into now, but most studies have been concerned with when children start learning the language and how many years they are exposed to the target language and they have opportunities to practice the target language. Now, the key players are clearly effective teachers of the target language. They need to be motivated not only to teach the language, but also to get feedback on their teaching by assessing the children. And they need very strong instructional skills. This cannot be overemphasized, not only in teaching and particularly in managing young children, but also in assessment, which is a whole different domain. Now, most of the publications on large-scale assessment projects test models. They propose a model and they try to find out how the model works out. They tend to involve many students. They are national assessment projects, and they aim to figure out what young learners can do, what proficiency level they have achieved, or in other words, whether they have achieved the achievement targets specified in their national curricula. Some such studies have been implemented in Hungary, and I've been involved in some of these. And one of the major criticisms that I have to admit is that speaking is hardly ever assessed in these large-scale assessments, because speaking is really difficult and very expensive to assess. Therefore, it's omitted. So there is already a major hiccup that can be identified, that although the aims of early foreign language learning include oral skills, speaking is hardly ever assessed. Therefore, we know more about literacy development in early language programs rather than speaking. Listening is more often included. The second type of project is typically based on the same data set, but they frame their research questions to compare young learners' proficiency in early or later start programs. In some countries, there were some curricular changes, and these changes allowed the researchers, for example, in Germany or in Slovenia, not in Hungary, because Hungary is more complicated than that. In many other countries, there is a very insightful overview published by the European Commission on how each and every country in Europe assesses students' proficiency and curricular outcomes. Now, let me move on to international proficiency examinations. So the previously mentioned national surveys and national assessment projects are also, in a way, complemented by international proficiency examinations. There are three major enterprises on the market and in the publications, and I have put their names up there. One very important point concerning these international proficiency examinations concerns that these are not free of charge. The parents have to pay for these. And interestingly, the owners of the English language test the rest of the world. Now, one of the impacts that we all know about concerns the empowerment of the children who earn such certificates, but some others can be demotivated, and examinations can also induce anxiety. There is some research, if you are interested, both in empirical studies and surveys on them. They are cited in that study. So these proficiency certificates result in children with haves and have-nots. The ones who never even attempt such an examination will not be able to boast of this special door opener. Score reporting is an interesting area. We discuss it in the paper. However, we don't know what happens after the examinations, and it's not known, because there is no such research on any of this, how children's proficiency is maintained into adulthood. And the general assumption seems to be, in my view, false assumption, that whatever you learn as a child will be with you forever. It's simply not the case. Attrition, I'm sure, works unless you maintain your proficiency, but there is no such research published. Now, one of the most recent developments in these early foreign language programs concerns content-based programs. In Europe, they are called CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. Some people want to be famous by coining new terms. And some small-scale studies compared English as a foreign language, more traditional programs, and the outcomes of CLIL programs. However, there is a big issue here, because these studies only assess children's proficiency in English, and they never ever test the content. Irrespective of what content area the children learn in the target language, the children's proficiency is not tested in that area. It's not included in the construct. And in my view, this is quite a problem. There is only one study that is an exception to the rule, where multiple instruments were used on English as a foreign language, and an analysis of science course books was also included, and the authors also used observations. That's the exception. There were 2 large-scale projects implemented on dual language schools, that's the label used in Hungary, or CLIL in Spain, and the outcomes are not clear. In the Spanish study, the advantage for CLIL students was not very clearly defined. In Hungary, there was nothing about the CLIL content that would have supported the claim that it is conducive to foreign language learning, although the students in those programs are more proficient. The question is why? Maybe they were more proficient when they entered, or they are more privileged by definition. So the main concern here is that the projects only assess the target language, and they are not concerned with the content that the children learn in the target language. The second area that is recently popular is about preschool or kindergarten programs. Parents are extremely motivated to put their offspring into these very early programs, and there are quite a few studies on mostly vocabulary. Both researchers and children think about early foreign language learning as learning vocabulary. The main findings are very mixed. First of all, children learn hardly anything. In some of the studies within group research design, the authors, several such studies were implemented. The authors want to find out how many of the, let's say, 5 words the children can remember after a few weeks or after many more weeks. And the outcomes tend to be framed very positively. Children have learned 1.2, that's the mean. And it turns out that out of 5 words, some children remembered none, and other children remembered maybe 2 or 3 words. But the framing is very positive, and these studies are published. Some other studies are a lot better designed, like Sun et al. And Unsworth's study. The latter one included teachers' proficiency, although the teachers' proficiency was indicated by the level they claimed they had. Some of them were native speakers, some of them were not. However, observation has not been used in these studies. And to me, it seems that very few studies with very few children use quantitative approaches rather than observation. So these are some worrisome studies on preschool English as a foreign language programs. Oh, and I forgot to mention that in some studies, children unexpectedly know more than they are supposed to know. They know more than nothing before the launch of the program at age 3, let's say. Now, the next area discussed in publications concerns teachers' practices and their assessment literacy, because this is a conference on assessment and how teachers assess their students. Interestingly enough, few studies were published on alternative assessments or learning-oriented teacher research with their young learners in their classrooms, although teachers' diagnostic competence as a construct or assessment literacy and practice, these have been around in the literature for quite a while. Very little is known about how teachers teach and assess their young learners and why. What I know from my own studies is very worrisome. Even if teachers go through the teacher education program and they graduate and start teaching, they very often fail to implement what they seem to be okay with and understand the main principles. One of the interesting trends that I would like to emphasize concerns some Western models of teaching and assessment implemented in different cultural contexts, mostly in Asia. I'll come back to this point a little later. I would like to characterize what, based on the literature, I think tasks for learning and assessment should be like. It's important to emphasize that any task that is good for assessment must also be conducive to learning. So they should be, for young learners, they should be meaning focused and age appropriate, cognitively challenging and valid, intrinsically motivating. They should not induce anxiety, but maintain a low anxiety level. Such tasks should target all the 4 skills, and some of them could be integrated. There should be small steps reflecting the slow progress that is so typical of young learners, and development is known to be often of U-shape. I remember from my own teaching experience how worried I was that my students did not really remember stuff. We did one thing, we did another thing, and they did not seem to benefit a lot. And then suddenly, a few weeks later, everybody was at home with most of what they didn't seem to get earlier. So these ups and downs, non-linear development is very real and induces anxiety in teachers. Each and every task for learning and assessment should have a clear purpose and an outcome, and those outcomes should be measurable. They should be based on the tiny steps that are so typical, and the digital format and the gamification, whatever fancy term for playfulness, are also very helpful and can be motivating and age appropriate. A few ideas about the impact of young learners' assessment. We know that English is seen mostly by the parents and then by their children as a commodity or a means of empowerment. It may open doors for children, and the lack of it may close doors. They may get into the best school if their English is good, and they may not even think about getting into any good school without English. Assessment can motivate both as a certificate and as classroom practice, and also demotivate in the long run. I would like to emphasize and remind ourselves that children are vulnerable. They are very sensitive to criticism and failure, and anxiety is real, even in classrooms where, for example, in Denmark, where there is no assessment, nothing. Children are still anxious. They are anxious because they have to speak in front of others, because they may make mistakes, because others may be critical of them, etc. So they have the same concerns as older learners. And I would like to mention the role of corrective feedback, which in my experience should, with young learners, always focus on meaning first, and then if they can make sense of it as a follow-up, on form as well. Now, there are some areas of concern that I would like to elaborate on. This whole area of young learner foreign language learning and assessment seems to be like a Rorschach test versus a puzzle. Parents and policymakers tend to look at it like an ink blot test. They see what they want to see, whereas researchers should look at it as a puzzle and piece it all together. My concern is that most of these puzzle pieces do not lead to the whole picture, and I will come back to that, as well as researchers don't realize that this is really multi-dimensional, and the puzzle should be solved over time, over the years as children progress. I have to state the obvious, that the younger the learners are, the slower their development tends to be. I wish I had known this. I thought as a teacher of young learners, I thought it was my fault. I wasn't doing the job well. And what young learners can do in a group can really vary on a wide range of performances. Some children from the same practice benefit right away and they can do things, whereas others take a much longer time. They may get to the same level, but over an even longer time. Now, the big question is how teachers can help them do better over time, whether teachers actually have the patience to work with them for such a long time. Another concern is about classroom teachers not conducting or publishing any research project. That I found really worrisome. Most of the publications are on successful projects. Many of the new programs are launched without any evidence, for example, in the kindergartens. And the integration of what the children know from outside of school is hardly ever there, except for, I have just read a very interesting and thought-provoking study by Mirna Erk in Croatia, who, although she was the researcher going to the classroom, but worked with a teacher, and they simply asked children to tell them what they know in English and where they know what they know from. And that's how they discovered that, for example, I'll kill you is something that many children knew, but that would not be something taught in school. Now we know, just to reframe the talk, that in order to achieve innovation and change, we have to think in terms of how English learning or foreign language learning is embedded in the larger school context and society. This is fully missing from all the studies that we surveyed in that overview paper. Most of these studies are concerned with only the foreign language, most importantly English, and they are not concerned with how the larger system implements assessment and how that interacts with teaching and learning. And we know that the whole assessment culture has to be taken into consideration when you want to introduce some innovation. I would like to emphasize that we need emix perspectives. We want to know whose vision of early foreign language learning is like and why? We know that all parents want the very best for their children. Teachers also have their own perspectives. For example, in a study on introducing about 200 diagnostic tasks in classrooms with teachers who volunteered to pilot them, one of the teachers on an oral task, which was supposed to be conducted in pairs, so every child was active with a partner working in partnership. The teacher, one of the teachers reflected, "It disturbed me like it did all teachers, I suppose, that I couldn't hear the answers." So even if there are tasks which the children can do together without control by the teacher assumes this is not good practice because she should be in control all the time. Or another teacher piloting the same tasks, and the author is Eva Boccia, found that children realize that comprehending something in English can cause pleasure. This is what the teacher discovered about her children in the class. Or what it's like to be a young learner. My colleague Jelena Mihaljevich-Zigunovic cited, "Every time our teacher announces a test, I panic. While I prepare at home," and I can't see the rest of the text, "I worry all the time," is most probably what she said. And Yuko Butler also has just published a study on asking Chinese children about their own knowledge about assessment and what they think about the assessment and their assessment literacy. Very valuable insights. Now, my general reflections on assessing young learners concern what do we want to assess and why? Who wants the results and what are they used for and why? And in general terms, assessment should always focus on informing teaching and learning. Otherwise, I don't see the point. We should focus on classrooms rather than large-scale assessments because they happen anyway, the young learners and their teachers. And unfortunately, it's known that some young learners are not successful. They are unsuccessful. And I figured it out many, many years ago when I conducted a study into unsuccessful language learners. Most of them started pretty early and they were unsuccessful early on. Now, there are some points for further research. I'm listing them here, and they are also listed in the article. First of all, I think it would be really helpful to share instruments and tasks for collecting evidence about children's abilities. And I think IRIS database would be a perfect place where people could place them. We would also need to find out more about the relationships between young learners' performances on tasks targeting one skill or multiple skills in integrated tasks. It would be really high time we worked on developing young learners' aptitude and academic target language ability and find out how these work at different ages with very young children, somewhat older children, etc. Obviously, it's possible to develop their aptitude. It would be, I was delighted to hear that some people are doing this, comparing the typical performances on the same tasks at different levels of proficiency at different ages in different contexts in Finland. That's, I think, a great idea. It would be great to share instruments and task types for collecting data on how children in the foreign language and the content they learn can be assessed. It would be important to compare what children learn in the content domain in the first language and in the foreign language. I'm in fact very surprised that this has not been done, thinking about the investment in such programs. We should know more about the impact of national and international examinations on everybody and how the results are used. As a teacher educator, I would really like to know more about pre and in-service teacher education's education programs' impact on what teachers do with what they have learned and what skills they have developed. We would also need to know more about formative assessment and alternative assessments and grading, because many schools require grading. There is no study on grades. And the comparison of what happens in the foreign language classroom and as a subject and other school subjects. And we know that the local assessment culture definitely impacts assessment in the foreign language classroom. It would be very insightful to find out what the benefits of assessment for learning are from the teachers and the young learners' perspectives, and how they may impact both sides, motivation, maybe anxiety, autonomy, how decision-making in the classroom is impacted, and of course, the outcomes in the target language. And finally, the uses of technology and gamification are very popular, and we would definitely need to know more. However, my question is digital literacy then part of the construct of what young learners can do in the foreign language? So here are my final thoughts. Research should be guided by making assessment conducive to children's and teachers' learning as well as general well-being. We know that languages are about people, about interaction with others, peers, teachers, and other people who speak or just know those languages. We need definitely more qualitative studies. It would be very insightful to conduct more case studies. What is it like to be a child learning a foreign language, and how does it feel to be a test taker? Today I heard the word test taker multiple times. That really impressed me. I don't think about children as test takers, but of course they are. Or what is it like to be the teacher of young learners, and other issues we could explore through qualitative inquiries. In more general terms, we need a multidimensional model that we want to test. We need a better understanding of the larger picture, but we also need to understand the smaller picture and many of the variables. And I hope that my talk might contribute to fulfilling our responsibility, that this fourth wave is not going to result in a really low ebb again in early foreign language programs. And I mustn't forget to mention Paige, because Judith raved about Budapest, and I must assure you that Paige is maybe even nicer. That's my town. So time for questions, and thank you.
Many thanks, Marianne, for this insightful and inspiring talk, and for being right on time. We have a number of questions in the Q&A, and if you don't mind, I'll go through them, read them out for you and everybody else.
Thank you.
The first one is by Norman. In CLIL studies, I have the impression that the teachers are selected due to their language competence and motivation. This is another impediment to a clear interpretation of the results. Do you agree?
I have no idea. The publications do not offer any insights into the teachers' qualities. We don't know. What I know informally is that the teachers I have worked with as a teacher educator, they are deep in trouble. Their English is okay, but their English in their own subject area is not that good. Like I remember a teacher I worked with who had to look up in the dictionary. She was a teacher of history, and suddenly she was expected to teach history. She had to look up all the proper names she was familiar with from history in English, and some of them at that time she couldn't find. She had no idea how to say, I don't even know what. Yes, so there are really blank spots in those studies. Key variables, especially about teachers, are missing.
So that's another area we should investigate. Thank you for that. Then we have a comment, a special thanks by Irina for Marianne mentioning young learners know more than they are taught. And Irina asks, why not focus on phonetics training before the age of 5 to 7 at the sensory motor stage, according to Piaget?
Okay, I have a special view on this. I used to teach children whose English became pretty good by the age of 14. I have never ever focused on the phonemic awareness. I never ever focused on how to pronounce one thing or the other, although at age 14, they focused on my pronunciation and they called my attention to the fact that some people say yeah, and I said yes, and maybe I should switch to yeah. In other words, I personally don't have evidence from my own experience that conscious focus on teeny tiny details about the language actually help. Other people may have evidence. I have not read it. I have read about people teaching sounds, letters, you name it. Actually, that's common practice in a project I'm working on now. My feeling is that this concern on part of the teacher about the teeny tiny building blocks of the language is not going to be as conducive as one might hope. These are empirical questions. I also have my biases, as you can see. I have beliefs, and I have the evidence from my own experience and from my observations. You have to weigh the pros and the cons. Is this going to be really helpful, or children just lose interest? I don't know. You have to figure it out for yourself.
Thanks for that, Marianne. Let's move on to the next question. Eileen asks, how much should we take into consideration the silent period young learners of languages could be expected to go through in preschool?
Yes, of course. Some children will not say anything, and they are normal children. Actually, there are adults who don't like to speak. Yes, silent periods exist. However, if you think about attainment targets and testing, this can be very unnerving. You are a teacher and kids say nothing, and that's normal. That's my experience. In my classes, I had some, mostly girls, interestingly, who never actually volunteered or said much for years. And then suddenly they blossomed. I had to be patient. I was very pleasantly surprised, and everybody else in the class too. Yes, silent periods exist, and we have to be very, very understanding, patient. Patience is valuable.
Thanks, Marianne. I think that's something we can all take on board, becoming more patient. Then I have a question for you, which I think you like. Jamie asks, do you think fun is a requirement for tasks and assessment for young learners?
It depends on what you mean by fun. Very often what adults consider fun with their adult understanding of fun is dead boring. Whereas what we think is just pure learning, they do find fun in it because of mastery motivation. In other words, fun is a fuzzy term. I don't even know how to define it. I would think more in terms of how a task impacts the learner. Whether the learner finds pleasure in doing it, finds it, the reason why I use the term cognitively challenging is because I know it's not widely used. Children like to be stretched, but they also like to be able to do what they are trying to do, especially after the second, third trial. So fun, I don't know, just like with adults, one person thinks something is fun and the other person says, no, thank you. But thank you for the question.
Which ties in nicely, your answer ties in nicely with what Gavin commented. He thinks the key thing for assessment is that young learners and all test takers should leave feeling it was a good experience.
Yes, a good challenge, and I could do it mostly. One of the criticisms about assessing young learners is, why would we ever expose children to feeling unsuccessful? Like, these are the things you couldn't do. Ah.
I fully agree.
Oh, good.
The next comment is from Irina. For once, she thanks you very much for your profound research and rich experience shared here with us. And then she comments that in Russia, there is a very successful project called CELT, launched by Reload, I think, Russian English language open doors program. So if any, do you know about it?
I don't, but if it opens doors, it's great.
So if anybody's interested, get in touch with Irina Pavlovskaya about the Open Doors project. Then we have a question by Jing. Would it be better for teachers to observe young learners rather than assess them?
Absolutely. Yes, please. Don't interfere. Don't try to induce anxiety. Observe them. See what they are willing to do. See how they experiment. See how they mix those codes. See how they communicate. Observation is the way forward. Yes.
Thank you.
I should have said this explicitly.
You've done it now. That's excellent. Let's move to Monique's question. You have mentioned that there are some anxieties and worries on part of parents and teachers with respect to the time that it takes for these young learners to develop a target language. Do you get the impression that these anxieties stem from a comparison to norm referent group of monolingual learner first language development? Monique, maybe you have to help me here. Rather than a norm reference group of bilingual or multilingual learners. I hope, Monique, I get you right that you asked whether the anxieties stem from a comparison to a group of monolingual first language learners rather than a group of bilingual or multilingual learners.
Okay, I think I understand the question. First of all, children who are multilingual, clearly they have to cope with more than children who are monolingual. However, they have a huge advantage. They know about multiple languages. They have certain strategies. So we should be looking at as a strength rather than a weakness. Although, for example, the study conducted, the large-scale survey in Germany, proved that the main issue is not even learning English. The main issue is learning German as well as English. And you don't need a degree in linguistics to understand that people who are struggling or are very good at two languages, language number 3 is going to hit you somewhat differently. As to parents, parents come in all sizes and shapes, from the super crazy, ambitious, hopeless, parent for a teacher, and the supportive, modest, I accept what you are saying. I remember in grade 7 at age 13, the father of one of my really great students came up to me at the garbage can, because we lived in the same building, and he said, "Don't you think you should have taught present perfect already?" And I thought, present perfect, that feels like home. And I explained to him that, yes, his son can use present perfect. He may not be able to state that he has just used present perfect, and he should wait a little longer to see him in action, how he communicates. A year later, we had exchange students who stayed with the families, and he admitted that he had not expected that his son would communicate better than himself.
So again, the patience comes in. Sometimes you have to wait.
Yes, parents, some parents want their children to be super mathematicians at the age of 6. Other parents are happy if they can add up whatever needs to be added up a little later. Parents are problem people. But mostly they want the best for their kids, but some are over ambitious. I'm sorry if any one of you is a parent like that.
We shall hope not. Now, Dina, that ties in quite nicely with the multilingual aspect you've mentioned. Dina suggests perhaps one more timely research area would be to find out how teachers cope with assessing multilingual students' performance in the classroom.
Yes, I agree. Yes. That's why I said you have to really zoom in on the actual classroom, the particular teacher with her students. Some use languages the teacher has no idea about. Now that's a challenge.
Yeah, that is. So there's more research.
Yes, so many new topics for further research.
That's great. We have 2 more comments, and I think we'll manage them all. Judith says, when you said, Marianne, it would be important to develop young learners' aptitude, did you mean language learning aptitude?
I mean all kinds of aptitude. And I know what Judith means. I mean from working memory to long-term memory, from inductive reasoning to deduction, phonemic awareness, every kind of aptitude. And we know that, of course, they can be developed. All we need is a little focus on them, not necessarily telling the students that we are boosting their, let's say, inductive reasoning right now, but to give them tasks which develop not only the language, but also the ability underlying doing the whatever task it is. Yes.
And Judith also asks, do you have suggestions which components of aptitude might be the best targets for improvement?
I'm a believer in inductive reasoning. I think the key to success, especially with young learners, is the ability to figure out meaning in context. If teachers could understand only this, they would have an easier life, because that's the ability of knowing more, or the ability to do more than you know. That takes you beyond what you have learned, if you can figure it out. Unfortunately, in research, sometimes teachers think if you can guess, it's a negative thing. You didn't know it, but you could guess it. No, that's the most valuable strategy you can teach everybody, not just kids. Try to guess. Is there more questions?
There's one last comment by Harry. Thank you, Marianne. Just a quick comment. I like the way that international large-scale assessment surveys measure children's cognitive abilities, math and reading, on tablets and one-to-one. For example, the International Early Learning Study seems to address 5-year-olds through cartoons and fun-like activities.
Okay, so that's a comment, right?
That was a comment, if I understood Harry.
Thank you very much.
We have no further questions, but in the chat we have a lot of thanks from Marianne and for your thought-provoking presentations, and many say they learned a lot. So thanks from my side as well, Marianne. That was a really lovely final talk of this great conference.
Thank you. I hope I didn't distress anybody. I hope I didn't provoke unpleasant thoughts, and maybe I provoked some thinking. I don't know. I'm so pleased I'm done.
And we are very, very pleased and happy that you have been with us and shared your insights.
Thank you. And don't forget about Paige.
That's true.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hand over to Richard and Deb.